Hello and welcome to Seattle City Makers. I'm your host, Jon Scholes. Welcome to our latest episode, everybody. I'm joined by Ian Courtnage, the CEO of Evergreens, the Northwest fast casual provider of salads, wraps, and warm bowls. Evergreens got their start in downtown Seattle in 2013 over there by the Metropolitan Grill at 3rd and Marion, and they've expanded since then. And Ian took over as the CEO in 2021. He is a native Seattleite, has held positions at some great Seattle brands, including Starbucks, Zulily, and Mod Pizza. While he was at Mod, he helped lead their significant nationwide expansion from 100 stores to 500 stores. Ian and I discuss how he ended up at Evergreens after a job offer and a plan to leave Seattle for Boston, and decided against that and landed in 2021 as the CEO of Evergreens. We talk a bit about that, how he has approached his role as CEO, what he draws from his previous experience at these great Seattle brands, the business of fast casual dining and restaurants in general in Seattle, how Evergreens names their salads, his favorite salad and wrap, and his perfect Saturday in Seattle. Hope you enjoy my conversation with the CEO of Evergreens, Ian Courtnage. Well, thanks again for making time for coming in and coming on Seattle City Makers.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So you're, 3 years in now to your role as CEO?
Yes, it's been an eventful
How'd you
3
find
years.
your way from Mod Pizza to Evergreens?
So it's funny, it was middle of the pandemic, and my family and I, we were actually going to move to Boston. I was taking a different job. So I gave notice on a Tuesday to Mod, said thanks for everything. We're moving to Boston. We told our kids, told our family.
What was the job in Boston?
I was going to run a big chunk of marketing for Panera.
Okay.
They're owned by a big German family office, but the intent was go do that job and then hopefully go run a smaller retail brand. Mm-hmm. So I gave notice, and the next day, Scott, the founder of Mod, called me and said, hey, thanks for everything. Now that you're moving on, we're investors in this other company, and we were going to go look for a new CEO this summer. Like, I know we'd have to get back to you quickly, but would you think about it? And so then by the next Monday, we were staying. So couldn't draw it up on the whiteboard.
That other company was Evergreens.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting journey.
Did you have roots or connections or anything to Boston, or was it just an adventure to get on the other side of the country?
Yeah, ostensibly a domestic study abroad for a few years. I'm from here. We knew we wanted to come back, but it was one of the few places my wife would think about moving. She loves Boston, and so it was going to be a fun adventure, and I'm really glad that we're here.
And you led a ton of growth at Mod. I think when you started, you had like 100 stores, and left, you had 500.
Yeah, it was an amazing ride. I think
How long were you there?
5 years.
Yeah.
So it was some of the best people I've worked with, some of the most fun I've had, and I had the opportunity to do so many things for the first time. And all of that is kind of what set me up to do this job, candidly, both the relationships and the experience. So it was a really, really cool role. And again, it's what led me to here.
What do you carry over from that massive scaling that you were helping to lead at Mod?
It's difficult, right?
Yeah.
And I think, especially for organizations, so much of what you're going through, the organization is going through for the first time, whether you're talking about new markets, new types of stores, new products, that I think everyone's collectively learning. And for me, I think as I look at kind of what we're doing at Evergreens, a lot of it's around how do you build sustainable growth? How do you get really clear on the things that matter most, and how do you not lose kind of that pulse on culture and people, and make sure that what you're building is going to be as enduring and amazing 10 years from now as it is in this moment.
Mm-hmm. You all kind of have an interesting window into sort of post-pandemic revitalization and how people are spending time and money and where, because you've got suburban locations, sort of more urban, certainly downtown and central core. What are you seeing over these last 2 years and how your customers' behavior and base is sort of shifting among those different locations? And how do you think about the next 2 years and where you focus your resources and new stores if you're expanding, but also staffing, et cetera?
No, look, it's been a difficult backdrop, right? When I came in, we had 4 stores open. And
what did you have pre-pandemic?
Pre-pandemic, we had, I think, 28. A big chunk of that was through an acquisition down in Portland that we had to unwind.
That's right, you're down in Oregon now, too.
Yeah, so we've had a window in kind of in the reopening of downtown, and I think it's been uneven, right? I think it depends upon the trade area. You have some places where there's a logical catalyst. So last year about this time, Amazon's kind of return to office acted as a meaningful catalyst, right? So that type of a trade area, there are things that can happen that can change the narrative and change the velocity. And then there's other places like Pioneer Square or on 2nd Avenue around 2nd and Pike for us where there's no logical catalyst. And I think to some degree you have, I'd say, intermittent safety issues. So we were talking about this a minute ago where our 2nd and Pike store, within the span of 9 months, the window got broken 3 times on the front window. Pioneer Square, we're a digital pickup only model down there just from a pure team safety standpoint. And so not that it's not getting better, but I think there are certain trade areas where you look at the time horizon to getting back to some semblance of what it was. And like, I believe in Pioneer Square in the medium term. It's just what do you have to deal with in the intervening time period. To your question around growth, I think that's an interesting one. And so I've got, a few friends who run different brands here. And I think it's very interesting how hard of a stance some of them take around whether they're going to grow within the city of Seattle or not.
Yeah.
And I think there's tremendous opportunity within the city, particularly for us. And it's just, it's a balance between how much certainty can you have around what a trade area is going to look like in the medium term, and what the economics are going to look like. Because you've got some of these headwinds around, you think about third-party delivery driver minimum wage and what that's just done to our business, where like relative to non-Seattle stores, the Seattle stores third-party delivery is down 40%, first-party delivery is down 50%. Like
this is the effect of the legislation adopted by the council late last year that's now being debated and discussed, and
which we were hoping like last week to get clarity.
Maybe reformed.
And then
but it's had a big impact on your
material. And I think for us, like that's still the minority of our business. So like it's painful but not existential. But you've got a bunch of brands where they are so exposed to that environment that we're like, it is existential. And so I think when you look at how do you go invest and where do you invest, I think you see people kind of taking a step back and saying, is that the right place? Again, there's tremendous opportunity. There's the consumers, there's the demand, there's a lot of trade areas that look really promising. There's a lot more density coming online if you think about what Roosevelt looks like today versus what it looked like, or what Northgate's going to look like in 5 years versus what it looked like in the past. There's exciting opportunity. The problem is like getting people to commit to it because of the uncertainty around all these different factors, whether it's the cost to build because of legislation around HVAC or cooking with gas and all that kind of stuff. And so it's around certainty. And so I would love to, I think we will continue investing in Seattle over time, but I hear a lot of other folks kind of taking their foot off the gas and saying like, is the juice worth the squeeze? Or, if I go to Issaquah tomorrow, I have a lot more certainty, right? I'm from Seattle. I love Seattle. Like I want to invest in Seattle, but I think there's other folks that I think are a lot more hesitant just because of the lack of certainty.
Do you think that the more suburban areas are sort of oversaturated with brands, folks that have reacted to the effects of the pandemic and people spreading themselves out, spending more time at home, staying in their own neighborhood, the downtowns, in the early part of the pandemic going very quiet? Did people sort of overcorrect for that, you think? And
I think macro, like setting Seattle aside or even this area, I think what you saw across the country was everyone started building drive-thrus, right? And so like everyone looked at what happened during the pandemic and said, oh my gosh, my stores are doing amazing volumes. I just need to go build more drive-thrus. And so drive-thru construction went nuts. Everything got super expensive. And then people, to some degree, started going back to work. And so I think you're going to see this hangover from that. Here, I think even if you go to the suburbs, you don't see a lot of, I would say, higher quality scalable retail still out there. I mean, if you go to the Issaquahs of the world, it doesn't feel like a lot has changed where all of a sudden you see all these different brands coming in. And part of that is like we're insulated here because brands don't come here, generally speaking, because of the cost of doing business, because Seattle loves Seattle, which is great. Like we are the beneficiaries of that. Seattle loves Seattle. I love Seattle. But it makes it hard.
We appreciate that which is created here. It feels like ours. And
we're immensely protective. But I think what that means is you just don't see brands coming into the market, which means that the brands you're going to see are the ones from this market. But it's also such a hard market to do business. I was talking to someone yesterday, and the reality is, if you think about all the retailers that are here, right? Like Nordstrom, Costco, REI, Starbucks, all of these really powerful retailers, it's odd that we don't have like a retail ecosystem from like a startup or a funding standpoint. Everything's focused on tech. We have all of this expertise, both on the tech side and the retail side. What has come out of Seattle in the last decade in a big way to get outside of this market, particularly within restaurants? Like it was mod, but outside of that, it seems odd that we are a very affluent city. We have a ton of retail experience, but there isn't a logical player filling that gap. So what you're going to see, I think, unfortunately, is
and when you say retail, you're thinking more in the food and beverage space?
Food and beverage, or physical retail,
Yeah.
right? Like obviously digital retail, huge, like Amazon, done an amazing
But
job.
you're saying since Nordstrom, since REI, since Costco, where's the next?
Yeah, I would say
version of that was
the last one to come out, which was physical but mostly digital, that I spent a couple years at, was Zulily.
Yeah, and now,
but I think
defunct.
But that's a whole different story. But I think it's just odd that we should be producing really great brands that go other places. The problem is there's the capital sources don't exist in the way that you would think, and when you talk to people outside of this market, in a lot of cases, they would much rather invest in Tampa or Houston or Nashville or places where they feel like there's more regulatory certainty, lower cost of doing business. And so the irony being, if you can be successful in this market, in this crucible, to be within the fire of this and actually make it out, I think that sets you up so well to go to other markets and not have that pressure within your P&L. But yet everyone kind of moves it to the side and says, well, come talk to me when you're in Denver or somewhere else and prove you can get outside of the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
And so it's frustrating, especially when you have something that you're super proud of and you believe in, but yet there's not the support infrastructure locally that you would expect.
More of our Seattle Citymaker conversation after this from Hudson Pacific Properties. Hudson Pacific Properties is proud to support and partner with the Downtown Seattle Association. With a 2.7 million square foot portfolio of premier office space in Denny Triangle and Pioneer Square, Hudson Pacific is committed to the long-term vitality of Seattle. And now back to our conversation. A little bit of a tangent, but since you spent time at Zulily, where do you think they went wrong?
I mean, a lot of the postmortems have focused on Amazon, and for sure there was some dynamic there. But I think that the interesting thing about that business is, if you think about the constraints on how it worked, right, in terms of flash sales, you're ordering in advance, getting it a couple weeks later, you can't do any returns. Where they started was the perfect place in terms of kids' clothes where fit doesn't matter, toys, some houseware, stuff where that model is fine. All of a sudden, when you pivot to women's clothing where fit matters, price points go up. People aren't just going to throw away the jeans like they would with the onesie if it didn't fit. And so the model became problematic. And then they brought a lot of offline brands online. So there was no competition because it was the only place you could get it, low price points, the model held together. Then once you started going into bigger brands, I remember when we ran Tom's for the first time, right? Go and buy a bunch of overstock from Nordstrom to go run Tom's. Well, great, you acquire all these customers on Tom's who never come back. And the way that the business was built was that they would acquire a customer for X dollars. Reliably, over the next 12 months, they would spend 3X, and everyone would be happy. Cost this to acquire a customer, this is the essentially the lifetime value of the customer. Equation held for a long time. Once you went into big brands, you would project forward, you would get the revenue from these customers coming back, and they never came back. And so the model actually broke at that point. And to make it really simple, I started right after they went public, and it was we missed earnings guidance 3 quarters in a row because that dynamic takes a while to play out. You don't realize that customer doesn't come back because normally they would come back in 3 to 6 months.
Right.
And so in order to get signal from those cohorts, you have to wait a while. And so that was actually where things started pivoting. It ends up being a really great $300 to $400 million business and a really tough $1 billion business. And so amazing people, amazing founders. I had so much fun working there, and there was so much pride in what they built. And so when we ended up selling that business to QVC, the collective heartbreak was huge. And so I think, you can point to later on Amazon and the model changing and all of that as the points, but the reality is that is when the model broke. So that quest for growth, I think, was what led it to where it was. And again, it was logical at the time, right? Everyone was making the best decisions they could. It's just, it was a little bit of a bummer.
Yeah. So back to the business dynamics in the food industry in this area. You talk about the costs here and staffing, et cetera. Why does it cost so much to eat?
I mean, so I'd say it's a host of factors. Like it's funny. I was having a discussion the other day where if you look at 2019 versus now, and I was just looking at a particular store, like that the average effective wage is up something like 33%.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it's funny. You kind of read through the narrative over the last few years, back when Dan Price was on his soapbox around like, well, a burrito shouldn't cost $20. You're like, it's not just about the labor line, right? So like, wage goes up, and that line on the P&L that's a third of your cost now goes up by 33%. It flows through everything else. It's in distribution costs of food. It's in HVAC repair. It's like across the board. It flows through everything. It's not just that labor line. And so I think people think about wage in isolation. We're like, okay, you have to pay your people more, but the reality is 70% of your cost structure isn't tied to people. But the reality is that cost flows through the rest of those lines. And then you end up in a place where you're like, oh, you're feeling it across the board. And so prices go up because like it's not just people either. It's like the cost of utilities and what's happened with the cost. Like, and it sounds boring, but the reality is like you're literally looking at every line on your store P&L and everything is going up materially over time. You're like, what do you do? And so I think, again, apples to apples, what ends up happening is people use less labor. So if I look at like our U Village store, same sales volumes as 2019 last year, 25 to 30% fewer labor hours. And so it's just the dynamic that we're in. And like, I don't have a solve for it, right? I don't begrudge the minimum wage piece of it. At the same time, it's like, can we talk about—
You gotta make a margin.
And can we talk about outcomes, right? Like what is actually happening in the labor market? And so, everything skews. Food is so expensive.
That's why we're seeing more counter service at a lot of establishments that have reopened post-COVID, but a different kind of model.
And I think like if you kind of follow the trend line, what you're going to see a lot more of is like the Mr. Wests of the world, where you have a pretty heavy alcohol mix. You have counter service because from an alcohol standpoint, like the cost of tequila, as far as I understand, is not really different than it was pre-pandemic. There's been minimal inflation within alcohol. Everything else has gone bonkers. So like going to something that serves alcohol that has counter service is like that's what you're going to see. The
margins on the alcohol have always been pretty good.
I mean, $20 cocktail, like how much labor goes into that, right? And the actual cost. I mean, Renee Erickson just in the last 12 months opened up Lioness up on Finney. Fantastic. But if you look at it, the kitchen is this big. There's like 2 people working in the kitchen. There's some people serving cocktails, like high service levels, but it's super small format, really limited menu, high alcohol mix. And I think that the interesting thing is you're going to have to see a lot more of that. So in smaller spaces, because it's just a different world and a different cost structure than it used to be.
How finicky do you think customers are? I mean, do you ever worry that like they love this for now and then everything just changes and you can't figure out why?
Oh, yeah. I mean, 100%. Like paranoid about that. I think it's so hard. Like restaurants are the silliest business in that you're signing yourself up to bang your head against a wall every single day to hopefully have great service, great product, and hope that you don't have something go wrong like a pandemic in the middle of it. And so it's a difficult business because it's one customer at a time, day in, day out. The food has to be good. The service has to be good. And by the way, then there's the competitive dynamic of what else is out there. And so in most cases, there's no obvious right answer on how to do these things. And if you go back to quality food and quality people, that's the formula. But at the same time, like tomorrow, all of a sudden, something else could come along. Consumers' tastes and preferences could change, and you're dead in the water. And I think, unfortunately, there are quite a few brands within Seattle that I think you would view as very Seattle that 3 to 5 years from now aren't going to be here because there's not access to capital. It's so much harder to actually have a viable business here, and people's tastes and preferences are changing. And with all the pricing everyone's taken, man, it's just like, wait, I have to pay how much to go and get a burrito? Right. Our product's not cheap. And so I think we've been the beneficiary of a very robust economic environment. And I think there's always risk. And so it scares me to death that tomorrow people are going to wake up and decide that they don't want our product or it's too expensive. So like we haven't changed salad pricing in I say 18 months at this point. I think we'll have to at some point in the not too distant future because all of the costs underneath are getting so high. But at the same time, I feel like even though our consumer base tends to be relatively affluent, I think a lot of people are looking and just saying like, I have to spend how much to get that? And so I don't know what the breaking point is. What I don't want to do is change portioning. What I don't want to do is change quality, right? Yeah. And so it's difficult.
So are your kind of ultimate then business points of tension around like, well, how much do I evolve and innovate and provide new offerings against sort of staying the course on what you know and what your brand is and what is tried and true and what customers can expect. I mean, it's got to just kind of drive you nuts of trying to figure out that balance in this super competitive space where costs in the last 5 years and people's sensitivity to them continue to increase.
Yeah, it's always a balance, right? When I came in, we had some products on the menu that I would say were loss leaders and some outcomes that just were not great. And we had to make some big adjustments to menu that were not popular. And so it's always this balance between how do you meet consumers' expectations, but do so in a way that makes for a viable business. And so there's no right answer. And I think there's obviously, you get down the path where if you change too many things, now it's a different beast and people don't have their favorites anymore and you disrupt their routines. And our product in a lot of ways is so habitual because it's something that, it's very personalized and it's, I would say, better for you than a lot of other options. So people have a different engagement and frequency with us. But again, if you start monkeying with too many things, then all of a sudden their favorite isn't there anymore. And so it's how do you evolve the menu and add things and trim where you need to without disrupting the core value prop. And look, I think there's probably moments where we've made too much change. At the same time, we didn't have the luxury to not make that change. And so it's, there's no right answer. And we struggle with it constantly. And again, paranoid about too much change for the consumer and candidly too much change for the team, right? Because it's one thing to change
what you
product.
can deliver.
Yeah. And I think that's like our operating model when you go into a store, like contrast that with a Chipotle. Like we're right next door to Chipotle U Village and you go into Chipotle and they've got 30 people working and we've got 10. And our model's just a lot more simple. And if we start to monkey with the simplicity of it, I think what you'll see is service levels will go down. And it's just, that's not our ball game, is to make things complex. So we're trying to broaden the menu while also making it simpler, so that we can, put it in different people's hands over time and have them bring it to life in great ways, but still provide great service and great product. So it's difficult.
And I know that you don't make these business decisions in the dark. You all rely on a ton of data to make decisions about your business. And you've scaled that in recent years, I think, right? What are some of the data points that people aren't thinking about this at all when they're building a salad, of like all the different things you're looking at to make decisions about where to open, how big the store is, what you're offering, the labor model, et cetera. Like, what are you obsessed about when it comes to the numbers?
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's this idea of what we call variable margin. So if you get that next salad coming in the door, how profitable is that salad, right? Because you kind of move aside rent and some of the fixed costs and you say, okay, like variably, like how much does it cost me to make that salad and what is the cost to goods profile? And some of it's really boring Moneyball equivalent to salad, but actually looking at what people are doing and how you can either influence behavior or position the offering to get to better outcomes is like, it's kind of the only way to survive at this point. And I think the nice thing is, right, pre-pandemic, we were call it, I think 15%, 20% digital orders. Now we're 50%. So we have all of this information around everything that's coming through in terms of what people are actually ordering. So you can start to pick up on really interesting things about how people behave, how certain products work, how people attach things to certain products. And you get a bunch of funny insights, which is, I think it's something like less than 2% of orders that actually go out the door based upon the ingredient set are vegan, right? And so there's a subset that are, but you think about a concept that's, predominantly produce and salad, and you immediately think, oh my gosh, that's where everyone that's vegan is going to go. And it may be true, but I think when you look at actual behavior, it's interesting to see what happens. But the nice thing is we have a product and a portfolio that like allows people to do whatever they want. So whether they're vegan or not, they can get what they need. But I think we look at all of that data as a source to kind of help inform how we develop products, help inform how we set up the make line in the store, right? How we train our teams, what products we sunset versus bring on board. So that product data set's actually incredibly valuable. And then just trying to understand, how do we make our teams more productive? How do we change our processes to make them more efficient, to make their lives easier, to make the guest experience better? So I think we're going to continue to iterate. We hired a new chief operating officer last year. He came from Mod and then came from longtime Starbucks, who's got a big process improvement background. And so just, his mentality and his thought process.
Somebody you worked with in your previous roles.
Yeah. And so Jon's amazing. And I think we've got the right team to go iterate through some of this. But I think at the core, you can't continue doing what you've been doing. Like the market's different. The operating environment is different. And I think you're going to see people evolve, whether it's the counter service and a lot of these other formats. Like you can't be static. And I think the takeaway in a lot of ways is in Seattle, I think, as a business, you spend, especially restaurants, spend a lot of time figuring out how to adjust to certain regulatory things versus adjust to running the business. So it's like, hey, state of Washington, if you want to have clear compostable packaging, well, it either now in the future is going to either have to have a green stripe through it, or the entire thing's going to have to be green. And you're like, oh, like one, it looks terrible. Two, all the vendors are only going to provide one product because none of the other states are doing this, as far as I know. So you've got like one option that looks terrible and makes your product look awful. So you're like, oh God, what do I do? Right. And so like you spend your time on that stuff instead
the ground underneath you is constantly shifting.
Yeah. And again, it's all well intended, but I think part of what I struggle with is there's not an overarching theory for how all of this should work. None of these things actually ladder up. It's disparate. This policy, this policy, this policy, which adds up to like, great, it makes it a lot harder, again, with good intent, but it makes it a lot harder to effectively take care of your team and run your business.
What's the process you all use to name the salads?
So it's a great question. I mean, right now we vote internally. We literally have a poll. I think we've got a running list of kind of who's named the most at this point. We try to never reuse them.
So is it like a little bit crowdsourced internally?
Yeah. It's
not just the marketing people.
No. Yeah. No, I mean, we have a really small team too. So if it was the marketing people, it'd be a couple people. We use our teams in store, we use our office, and then like we're trying to do more on the consumer side. Like I've got my little focus group of my friends who are really into puns, and so they love this stuff, and they've named a couple. So that's like one of the most fun parts of it. It's obviously even when you pick a name, there's also the crowdsourcing of making sure you're not doing something silly, right? Or it's like, oh, it makes sense to us. And the reality is sometimes we get flack on names. We try not to cross any lines. Like we have a very diverse team, especially in the stores. And the last thing we want to do is to, do something that they wouldn't be proud of. But
have you had to edit?
Not since I've been here. No, I think we've had things that have won that then we were like, upon reflection, that's probably not we have a Thai warm bowl, and I think the winner was the king in Thai, but it was right around an election in Thailand, and it has a lot to do with the king. And it was like, that's not the right, it was not the right time. So
you have a 24-hour rule for you got to sleep on them before you put it on the menu.
Yes. So I think we'll involve consumers more over time, but it's super fun.
How did you get into this industry? You were at Starbucks, then Mod.
So
then Evergreens. Is this what you thought you'd be doing when you were growing up?
No, I mean, I think I always wanted to be in a role like this. But when I got out of grad school, I'd had an internship somewhere, and culturally and product, I didn't understand it very well. The culture was not a good fit for me. And I kind of reached out to a family friend who had been at Starbucks for a long time. And I just said, hey, I really want to go somewhere where I'm going to learn, be a part of something, and that has a culture that's more of a fit for my personality. And he said, I think it'd be a great place to go and learn. And so I went there for 4 years. I didn't expect at that time to continue being in retail forever. But look, I think everywhere I've been, I've understood it as a consumer. It's tangible. I like it. I get it. And so it's not rocket science. At the same time, it's also really hard because you have to get up and do it every day. There's no idea of recurring revenue in restaurants, right? You have to show up every day and open the doors, and 50,000 things can go wrong. But at the same time, it's always on, and that's kind of fun, as frustrating as it can be sometimes. So I'm happy to be here. I'm lucky to be here, but I really love our product and our team and kind of what we stand for. And I think if there's more of this out in the world, that's probably a good thing.
And this is your first role as CEO, right?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So what's been most rewarding, most challenging from your first 3 years as a CEO?
Yeah, I think I've seen, a lot of the stuff we've been doing, I've been involved with in the past, but I think figuring out how to let the team do the leading in a lot of ways, right? Because we have people who are experts in their individual fields, and my job's to set the direction and get out of their way and support them as they go. And so it's, I've made many, many mistakes because I'm going through a lot of this for the first time. But I think it's, in some ways, this to me is similar to when I had children, where it's you get to this moment, you have children, and then you slowly start to realize that, most people have no idea what they're doing. They're making it up as they go. And so as much as they have grounding in how to be a functional adult, like now all of a sudden you're responsible for this thing, and you have to have the confidence and the conviction to stick to your guns, and you also have to be adaptable because you don't know what you're doing. And so again, I've learned a ton throughout the process. I have an amazing team, which is what's made it a lot easier. We've got an amazing group of advisors beside us to help gut check as we've gone through this. But like, I joined in the middle of the pandemic. So a lot of what we were doing was really, I would say, new for a lot of us in the industry, where like, when was the time when all of a sudden you had to go get out at 10 leases in a short period of time because of a pandemic, because the site that used to be your best site, well, now it's not viable. And so, it was a journey, but again, I think it's really about having that team.
You got the advanced placement CEO course. And
trial by fire, right?
Yeah, so I getting the company out of COVID, and
and again, like super supportive advisors and amazing team that's why we're here. And I think as we go forward, I think we've crafted a really good plan. I think there's a ton of opportunity, and it's also not easy.
Did you have a really clear and intentional approach of like, this is how I'm going to spend my first 100 days or my first year, and like, this is the process I need to go through as the new person here? Or was it, I dive in and...
Did I have a plan? Yes. Did we get kicked in the teeth pretty quick?
Yeah.
I mean, when I came in, I think we had 6 months worth of cash left. We had to kind of position ourselves. Like, we had, I think, $3 million in debt. We owed SeaTac Airport $1 million. We owed a bunch of other vendors a bunch of money, and we had 6 months worth of cash. And it was like, okay, go figure out how to raise money. We have a great group of investors who partnered with us to figure out how to go and do that, so that we get clear of all that debt, get out of a bunch of leases. But as much as there was quote unquote a plan, a lot of the plan was like, don't die. It just, there were things that kept happening, whether it was the waves of COVID that kept coming through, where all of a sudden you'd have summer, and I can't remember if it was 21 or 22, where you
thought we were done.
You had this peak, and volumes are starting to climb. We were starting to reopen stores, and then you got a wave of COVID. Now all of a sudden you're back
Delta
to square one. Yeah, exactly.
Omicron,
it was really difficult, but I think you learn as much from the stuff that, or more from the stuff that didn't go well, right? From the hard stuff than you do from the easy stuff. So like, we've learned a lot because there was a lot of hard stuff.
Yeah. So no regrets on going to Boston and
no. I mean, I'm so lucky to be here. Again, I love the brand and the team and the product, and I think, my family's still here and my wife's family's close by. So like, for personal reasons, not having to uproot everyone, as much as it would have been an adventure, I think is it's been great to stay.
I imagine you eat more salads now than you.
Yeah,
less pizza and more salads.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I don't know. I'd probably been like, I knew of Evergreens for sure before I took this job. I'd been a customer, but I wasn't very frequent. I didn't eat many salads. And I think at this point, I obviously eat a lot of salad along with our warm bowls and our wraps. But it's been cool to learn a slightly different piece of the industry. But really, really happy to be here.
How are your customers different from pre-COVID? When and who, when they're buying, why they're buying, who's buying?
Yeah, I mean, I think to your patterns question, if for our downtown business, right? If lunch was Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. ish was the central part of demand. Well, obviously now it's Tuesday through Thursday, and it's 12 to 1:15. So you look at a store that's doing similar volumes to 2019. Now it's squished in half the time, and so it's much more of a thrash for the team. And so operational efficiency and being on your game is much more important than it used to be. And I think given pricing, right? Like, people's expectations have changed, where they're like, am I paying $12.47 for a salad that pre-pandemic was $9 something? Like, again, everything's got more expensive, but I think there's different expectations that go along with that. And because everyone is in the office for a shorter period of time, like, feels like folks are more rushed because they're coming in a little later, they're leaving a little earlier, and they're 3 days a week. So like, they expect their order to be ready on it. They expect to be able to get through the line if they're coming in to order. So it's a more difficult environment. The patterns are different. And I think ultimately there's ramifications for what the business in aggregate looks like. I think different patterns in the suburbs, where during COVID, like at U Village, it was like a lot busier during the week because people were doing whatever they're doing at U Village midday. And so now that's kind of gotten back to a little more normal than it used to. But you're trying to understand like what is it that we're doing and we control that's influencing things, and what is just the market and things changing. And so that's always the balance is like, okay, did we influence that, or was that something exogenous to us? And so that's always retail is trying to figure out like, is it because we're good? Is it because something that we didn't control happened? Yeah, seriously. And the answer is it's all of the above. Yeah. So, but patterns are changing. I think like the airport continues to be very, very busy for us. And so that's been a real blessing to have that as an anchor point. And SeaTac's just, amazing airport, just keeps getting busier. And
it really is. I think we don't fully appreciate what a great airport, the experience that is, and the food and beverage and just the overall experience. You go to other places and you kind of get reminded that we got it pretty good there.
Well, and with having Alaska, right? Like Alaska's one of our partners. You can get 2 different salads.
I saw that. You all just recently did a partnership.
So we started it like right at the end of 2019, and then COVID happened and it went away. And so now we're just bringing it back. And so, I like as a consumer, I love Alaska. As being from Seattle, I love Alaska. And now having them as a partner is so great. So it's like, yes, SeaTac as a whole, you've got great airline, you've got great airport, and we love being there. So it's been a really good setup for us.
So what do you hope to see for the business looking 2-3 years?
Yeah, so I think, going back to my point on kind of how the rest of the country views concepts that are here, I think one of our big priorities is to take what we've built here and take it other places. At the same time, with interest rates being really high, with kind of, I would say, the macroeconomic view changing a bit, it's harder to have people invest to go build stores ourselves in other places, right? So all of our stores we own and operate at this point. As we go forward, when we go to other markets, we're going to put the brand in other people's hands, right? So through franchising and licensing. I would say that when I came in, that wasn't where I envisioned us going. I think with all the work we've done to simplify the model and all the opportunity that's out there, I think it's the right thing. But, so we're going to go to Boise and Salt Lake City and Denver, but we're going to have one franchisee in each of those markets. So we've got a partner that we kind of really invest in to make sure they're successful, to make sure that they're bringing the brand to life in the right way, and just kind of take it market by market. At Mod, we grew really fast. I think like my second or third year there, we opened 100 stores in a year, which was the fastest growing restaurant in the country, like blistering pace, particularly for mostly company owned. But at the same time, I think when you're going that fast, it's really hard to go deep into each market. And so I think we want to go into these markets, go deeper, find the right partner, and again, build a business that's still going to be here and thriving 10 years from now. So we're not going to go sign the one-off franchisee in Tulsa, right? We're going to invest heavily in these relationships and kind of building out these initial few markets. So it's a change for us, right? There's a mentality shift there for us as a business. At the same time, the engine we have here and down in Portland in terms of the stores we own, like that's going to continue to be the engine for the foreseeable future. So like we have a vested interest in making it successful. But I think building through partners is going to offer a really interesting opportunity for us.
Are there a set of demographics that you're looking at that are to be similar to Seattle in the markets you go in? Or is it just, hey, we're going to go places that are growing, that are economically thriving, where they've got job growth and population growth, et cetera?
I think it's both, right? I think it's, yes, you want economic growth, right? You want vibrancy, you want people to be going to that space, you want economic activity, and you want to see some of the demographics that align with at least what we know today is the core, right? Because if you zoom out over the next 10 years, I think there's a lot of brands that are going to help kind of build this category of healthy, fast casual. So the Kavas and the Sweetgreens of the world, and like, we wish them all the success in the world, because the more they're out there talking about salads and bowls, the more it's top of mind for everyone, right? Like we have a different approach than they do, but they can help build the category for us. I think that, 10 years from now, again, it's going to be more relevant. And I think as it gets more relevant, and as you see this compression of like fast food prices and I would say fast casual prices, the gap is shrinking. Now, all of a sudden, we're going to be in the consideration set for a lot more folks further down the income stack. So like now we can go to different types of trade areas over time. So I think in the short term, let's go to the places where we know the people from a demographic standpoint, from a psychographic standpoint, look like our consumers here. And then over time, we're going to have all these other opportunities to keep working out. So like if you take Seattle, right, like based on our presence right now, we'll keep growing kind of in little concentric circles out from where we are. So you go from Bellevue to Redmond to Woodinville, right? You go from downtown Seattle to Ballard to Greenwood to Northgate. And so just like where that brand awareness travels, but hopefully over time, you think 5 years from now, okay, now we're up to Alderwood. Now we're down to Federal Way as the category gets built, right? As there's more compression on price points with the Chipotles of the world. So that's the vision. But I think, staying true to what we know at the moment, just from a risk averse standpoint, as we go in these markets, like go to the highest conviction places. One of our advisors, one of the best things he said was that, the best decisions you'll make oftentimes are the sites you don't take. Right. Because one bad site or one site that doesn't work out how you think it's going to work out can be existential when you're really small. So I think you'll see us go to the places that look like the places where we're successful. And over time, once we've built that brand and presence, move out from there.
Do you have a favorite salad?
I mean, I think I kind of alternate between these three platforms: salad, warm bowl, wrap, depending on how hungry I am. I think my go-to, and I feel just so very basic saying this, is sombrero. It's our most popular product. I'll add quinoa, cashews for a little crunch. Great, easy. If I'm a little hungrier, I'll go we have a Med over heels wrap, which is like Mediterranean quinoa, hummus, pickled onions, chicken, hearty, but doesn't make you feel bad afterwards. You feel great, still go do stuff. And then we just introduced grains-based wrap, and there's one that's called not a burrito, and it's like quinoa, and I think it's got steak and tomatoes. It's really hearty, but again, you still feel good afterwards. You won't go take a nap in the afternoon. So I alternate between those three, make some tweaks to each of them, but I live a very active lifestyle, and so our brand fits really well with how I live and how I want to eat. And so it's a lot of times you get told you're not the target demo for your brand. And I think this is one of the rare cases where I can say in a lot of ways, I am the target demo.
Alignment.
Yeah.
That's good.
So and that's dangerous in the sense that I'm still not a lot of our consumers. And so to think that through only my lens is problematic.
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess in your position, what do you see as the future of downtown? What do you think is most important? Where do you think this is all going?
I'm an optimistic person by nature, and believe in the resiliency of our cities. I mean, it's a model that's been around for thousands of years, right? So my son and I were in London last July, and I just was standing around remarking on just how many people were out and about, and the retail that was thriving and open, the parks that were full, and you think of what that city's been through in 2,000 years, and it's still standing and thriving. And I think sometimes we lose a little bit of that perspective because our cities are not that old and our downtowns are not that old, especially on the West Coast. And but we've had our share of adversity here in Seattle, and challenges and fires and economic busts, and our downtown stands stronger today than it did 30 years ago. We got more assets and more on the way with the waterfront. So no doubt challenges though with a lot of vacancy and a drug epidemic and a police force that's the size of it was in the 90s. So, but I like our odds. I wouldn't bet against Seattle.
And Seattle's amazing.
And there's just this creative, entrepreneurial, innovative spirit here, and a consumer base that appreciates it, that is proud of it.
What do you think, as business leaders, we can do to help, right? Accelerate that kind of revitalization of downtown, and how do we
continue
step in?
Speaking up, continue engaging with city leaders, with other civic leaders. I mean, I think that engagement matters to the course we're on and the progress that we can make. I mean, I think Seattle's histories and the good things that have gotten done here because of the private sector and nonprofit leaders and civic leaders engaging with government, not being on the sidelines, not just leaving it up to the folks who run for office, but it's about everybody being all in. So, and we're seeing that. I mean, I think we're seeing tons of investment and commitment to Seattle and the downtown, and so I'm generally optimistic. Are you more optimistic or feel more positive about the business climate today than when you joined?
I think it's
Evergreens.
Yes and no, right? Am I optimistic about Seattle 5 to 10 years from now? Yeah. I'm not gonna move anywhere else, right? This is my home. This is where I'll be. Now that we didn't move to Boston, we're staying here. I think it's just we have to get through the messy middle, and I think
near-term uncertainty.
Well, and I think ultimately you have to believe there's going to be some sort of an economic correction in the not too distant future, based upon nothing. But I think we're going to go through cycles, and I think there's going to be some really hard decisions that everyone has to make. And I think some of the things that we're pushing really hard on as the city of Seattle, I think the priorities are going to shift, right? And I think it's it'll be interesting to see what ends up happening. I think it's everything is up for debate when times are great. I think there's a retrenchment when you've got, more macroeconomic uncertainty. And so it's, how do we get through the next 10 years? How do we fix things like Seattle public schools? Because I think, both my kids go to Seattle public school and they've had a great elementary school experience, but where does that all go? Because if those are the cohorts that are going to be the business leaders 20, 30 years from now, we need to plant some really good seeds and build a good foundation. And so it's, again, I think it's really, how do you get through these next 10 years? Some of that a function of COVID, some of that a function of, I would say, incoherent policy. So again, I'm optimistic long-term. I believe in Seattle. It just is going to be messy in the middle.
Yeah, messy in the middle, indeed. So, we conclude with two standard questions. One is, what was your first job?
My first job, I think I was 12 or 13. I worked up at Jackson Park Golf Course. So my mom would have to drive me up there because we didn't live anywhere near there. But I loved golf. I played in high school. I played in college.
Yeah, you still play?
I still do, yeah.
Yeah.
But it was a way to get free golf, because if you worked there, you got paid whatever, a few dollars an hour, but then you got free golf at all the Seattle public courses.
What were you doing?
I was cleaning carts and filling up water. It was nothing glamorous, but it was a great way to get into retail. And so I spent, when I was in high school and into college, I worked at different golf courses. I worked at Putts up on Aurora. I was very much frontline retail for a good chunk of time.
Were you interested in the business side of it when you were there? Were you kind of paying attention to how does this place work and run and make money or not?
Well, and one of the places I worked was a course called Snoqualmie Ridge out in Snoqualmie. That was private at the time, and I start right when it opened. It was right before the .com bubble burst. So you saw a bunch of people join, membership costs go up, and then the bubble burst, and all of a sudden nobody was there, and they could everyone wanted to sell their memberships, and how cyclical it was super interesting. And it's Seattle's a funny place if you're a golfer, because there are not a lot of good places to go golf in any proximity, and it's very expensive and
crowded.
Super crowded.
This side of the mountains, at least.
So that was my first job, Jackson Park.
Yeah, right on. And our final question is, what's your perfect Saturday in Seattle? If you can design it from morning till night, what are you doing?
So I would say it's going to be a mix of stuff for myself and stuff with my family. So I say stuff for myself, I would get up early. I would go out to Raging River and go on a mountain bike ride. Quick up, quick down, get out. Just beautiful. And summertime, you can go out there at 6 a.m, be done by 7 and come back. So I would start there, come back, make my kids breakfast. We'd probably, they both really like soccer. So we'd probably go play a little soccer, go down to Agua Verde, get some lunch, maybe do a little kayaking, probably take a nap after that. They probably wouldn't. I would. And then, I think my kids are getting a little older, and I think, especially during COVID, you kind of get in these cycles and ruts of these are the 5 places that we go. And I think what we're trying to do more of is get them out of that and be cool, we're just going to go here, and we're going to go walk around, and we're going to go to the park, and we're going to get food, and we're just going to go to a new place.
Yeah, we've never been here, but we're going to figure it out.
So I think trying to just get them out further afield and candidly force them to do things they don't like, right? Because they end up having fun, but it's just so easy. You work hard, you're tired, and you get to the weekend, you're okay, let's just chill here and do something easy. But man, it's especially now that they're older, you just see.
How old are they?
11 and 7.
Yeah.
So,
it's a sweet zone.
It is where they still want to hang out with you.
Still want to hang out. They're not,
for the most part,
not super moody yet.
Yeah. The 11-year-olds.
They don't smell yet.
Yeah. Not yet.
Yeah.
They'll get there real soon.
Yeah.
But I think just going and forcing them to do new things. So that would be part of it, right? Is finishing the day in a different neighborhood, in a different place, going to a restaurant they don't know, and just walking around and observing, because I think they're so curious and fun and engaged. But again, day to day, it's so much of it's so tiring, and that I play soccer and do all this stuff. So I'm an unpaid Uber most of the time. When we get the chance to do something new, I think it's really beneficial for them.
Yeah. The unpaid Uber thing, rings true. My kids are big soccer players. And,
how old?
14, twins. So,
nice.
I feel like shuttling them around the city.
You just
second job.
You got it done all at once. That's
yeah. Your kids like salads?
My daughter actually does now. Son, not so much. But she'll eat it. She'll eat it as much as well.
How much mod pizza did they eat when you were there?
Oh, so much. Yeah. All the time. It's still, especially my son, loves mod pizza.
Yeah, mine too.
So he
hits the 6th Ave location.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for making time for this, and great to have you all in downtown, obviously, and we wish you the best in growing and scaling in this market and others. So thanks for making time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.
Well, hope you enjoyed my conversation with Ian. Thanks to Ian for making time to join us on Seattle City Makers and discuss the very interesting business of salads in Seattle. I'll never order a salad in the same way again and have much more insight to all the decisions and data and complexity that goes into running the business that Ian runs. Appreciate his insights and the investments they're making in our city. I want to close out with a recommendation of something you got to check out in downtown Seattle, and I want to highlight the 45th year of the Downtown Summer Sounds concert series that will kick off on Friday, July 5th at 4:30 p.m. at Westlake Park. We'll have 30 plus outdoor performances from July to September this summer, from hip hop and folk pop to psychedelic punk rock and desert blues. There's something for everyone at Downtown Summer Sounds, brought to you by the Downtown Seattle Association and presented by Amazon. Thanks to them for helping us bring free outdoor concerts to the parks and public spaces in downtown all summer long, from Westlake Park to Occidental Square and Bell Street Park and Union Square and many other spots across the downtown this summer. Again, kicks off on July 5th. The full lineup for bands and times and locations will be out here soon. You can follow the DSA social channels, Instagram and Facebook, for that full lineup, or keep an eye on downtownseattle.org, where the full schedule will be out at the end of this month. Well, thanks everybody for joining us on this episode of Seattle City Makers, presented by the Downtown Seattle Association, with support from James Cito and production by Spark Creative.